Exciting times ahead. You've just bought your new e-mountain bike and you're about to get out there for the first time. So in today's video, I'm going to be running through a few things that you definitely want to avoid before you get out there. Now, most e-mountain bikes are going to have suspension of some sort, be it a fork up front or a shock on the rear, or maybe both. But a key thing not to forget before you get out there for your first ride is to set up that suspension. If you don't get your sag right, that bike is going to handle really badly out there on the trails. Now, a lot of forks and shocks can be adjusted by air pressure using just a shock pump. Now, this is called sag. Now, getting that air pressure is definitely really key in setting this up. Now, a lot of fork manufacturers actually have the air pressure charts and the tables on the inside of the fork legs or on their websites. It's a pretty simple process. I'm showing you how to set the sag. So if you've got an air shock on your bike, it's fairly simple. If you look on the shock body, you're going to find markings on there that say 10, 20 and 30%. The ideal position to get this band in is around 30%. So you need to get all your riding kit on, your spare backpack, water bladder, and if you ride with a spare battery, include that too. Literally everything you take on a ride. Then we get on the bike and we're not compressing the shock, we're simply loading it up into a seated position. Then look down on the shock shaft and that band will have slid down to a position. Take note of that and then you add or decrease the air pressure to get that band to sit at exactly 30%. And pretty much similar for the front forks too. So if you've got a coil shock or a coil spring in your fork, the way that you change your sag on this is by increasing or decreasing the weight of that spring. So this means actually swapping out the spring that you have in the fork or the rear shock for a new one, be it a lighter or a firmer spring weight. So don't forget to get that sag right before you get out there for your first ride. A well set up bike means that you can have good balance and good control. Forgetting to adjust your saddle before you get out riding is definitely a big mistake. On an e-mountain bike, you're going to spend a lot of time in the saddle. And the reason for this is that the most efficient way to be riding your e-mountain bike is sat down and spinning smooth circles rather than being out that saddle stomping on the pedals. Now, your saddle can be adjusted in lots of different ways. You can move it forward, you can slide it backwards, you can tilt the nose up and you can tilt the nose down. Is there an optimum position? Well, this is really personal. Another great thing about e-mountain bikes is a lot of them will have a seat post dropper, meaning you can get that seat down low for riding downhill and technical stuff and raise it to get a little bit more efficiency. Ideally, you want a balanced saddle position. You don't want it too nose down, pushing your weight too far on the handlebars. You don't want it tilted too far back. That's going to put a lot of pressure on that nose area. You just want it kind of in the middle, but adjusting it is the ultimate way to get the most out of that saddle. Here's how we're going to do it. Okay, so for raising the height of the saddle, there's a couple of different options here. If you've got an old school fixed seat post, you're simply going to have to undo the quick release or the Allen key bolt and raise that saddle manually or drop it. But if you've got a seat post dropper, obviously you can drop and raise it with the lever. But if you need to adjust this, again, it is with the seat post collar. Undo this and you can move the outer of the seat post up or down in the frame. But just go careful with this, because if you do it too much or pull it too high up, you can mess with that cable tension. So just go careful with that one. So to adjust the saddle forwards or backwards, you need to undo both the bolts that you're going to find underneath the saddle. You might have one, but usually two on these models. Slacken those off and just slide it to the desired position, then retension them. But just note on the rails that there is a maximum mark where you can adjust the movement in the saddle. And whilst you're there, if you tension one bolt and loosen the other, you can actually change the pitch of the saddle. So if you loosen the back one off, it's going to drop the back of the saddle. If you tension the front one, it's going to pull that nose down. So just mess around with that saddle position and get it right for you. Getting that saddle height and saddle position is super key in e-mountain biking. So you really don't want to neglect the time in making that saddle setup, because you need to make sure it's right for you. You're going to be spending a load of time in that position. Now, one thing you definitely don't want to forget before you hit the trails is to bed your brakes in. Now, first off, when you get the bike out of the box, the brakes won't feel that powerful. But once they are bedded in, they are definitely going to bring you to a stop pretty quick. Now, the idea of bedding your brakes in is to transfer the material from the brake pads to your brake rotor. And the quickest way of doing this is simply outside your house, riding along, dragging the brake a little bit, applying it on and off to get that material onto those rotors. And once that brake is fully bedded in, you should be able to lock up either wheel with just one finger. Now, your brakes should also be silent in use. You might get a little bit of howling from them in wet conditions, but it shouldn't affect the power. If you're getting a lot of noise from your brakes and very little power, chances are that that brake is contaminated with oil. Now, the only way to get around this is you could try some brake cleaner on there, but usually it means a fresh set of pads. So super important to bed those brakes in before you get out there for your first ride. Good brakes mean good control, and you shouldn't need any earmuffs. Now, shifting your gears when under load is a definite dark art on e-mountain bikes. And if you forget to learn how to change gear properly, it could lead to a lot of wear on your drivetrain, or maybe a snapped chain. So here's a few little tips that might make things a little bit smoother for you. Firstly, make sure your gears are perfectly set up. Second is anticipate. Look at what's coming and select the gear before you need it. And then lastly, learn to ease off the pressure of the cranks whilst the gear change is happening and feel the change. Now, it's a great idea to get into washing your bike after every single ride, but one thing you don't want to forget to be doing is to dry your bike too. If you don't dry your bike, those metal parts on your bike, so things such as the chain, are going to go rusty. And next time you get your bike out of the garage, it's going to sound like a budgie riding down the trail. To dry your bike, the kit you need is pretty simple. You're just going to need a microfiber cloth and some water dispersing spray. Now, just dry that bike off top to bottom. Pay particular attention to areas such as the charge ports and any electrical items. Get some water dispersing spray in there and double check that they are definitely nice and dry. And then things such as your chain, make sure that's nice and dry too. Then apply some lube to it just to keep things running nice and smooth and keep that rust at bay. You do not want any water to be sitting on your e-bike whatsoever. A dry bike is a happy bike. One thing your e-bike will not appreciate is being totally submerged in water. I mean, some shallow river crossings or fords definitely won't be a problem. Now, as a rough guide, the bottom of your motor casing or the skid plate should be your maximum wading depth. If you go any deeper than this, you're definitely going to run into problems, particularly if you're regularly submerging that battery in the motor. But if you do go under the water with it, get it out as quickly as you can, get some water dispersing spray onto those electrical components and make sure it is bone dry. Now, if you're into deep water, just get a dinghy. Don't be afraid to see what your e-bike is capable of on your first ride. It's a very different sport to traditional mountain biking, and those climbs you once thought impossible become a reality. It's a pretty rare occurrence to be pushing an e-mountain bike up a hill. Mountains do become days out for adventures to be had and many memories to be saved. They really are the key to some great days out. So there we are, a few things to avoid whilst you're out there, or maybe before you even set off on your first ride on your brand new e-mountain bike. But get involved down in the comments box down below if any of those things have caught you out on your first ride, whether it was not bedding your brakes in and having a crash, something like that. Love to hear it. Get involved. Give us a thumbs up if you enjoyed today's video. Make sure you subscribe to us here on EMBN and check out the merch shop for these brand new t-shirts and of course our race jerseys.